At my son's wedding, I heard my daughter-in-law introduce me to her wealthy parents with a smile so polished it almost gleamed. "This is the family shame we're stuck with," she said, as if she were commenting on the weather or the floral arrangements. The laughter that followed spread across the table like a spilled drink. Quiet at first, then rolling outward until it touched every corner of the room. If you're watching this from anywhere in the country, tell me where you're from. I want to know how far this story will travel, because moments like that, they change something inside you. The ballroom was warm, full of soft lights and gold trim, the kind of place where people pretend their lives are perfect. I stood there in a navy dress I'd ironed at 6 a.m., holding the clutch my late husband gave me on our 40th anniversary, and tried to steady my breathing. My son was across the room, my son's cross greeting guests near the ice sculpture shaped like a pair of rings. He didn't hear what she said. Maybe that was a blessing, or maybe it made the sting worse. I didn't react, not with my face. At my age, you learn the power of stillness, so instead, I just adjusted the small pin on my dress and nodded politely. One of her relatives raised a glass to me as if to say, "Lighten up, it's a joke." But it wasn't a joke. Not to me. And not to anyone who's ever been talked down to by someone who thinks your worth can be measured by the price of your shoes or the size of your bank account. I took a slow step back and let their conversation drift away. The band was tuning up near the stage, the soft echo of a guitar filling the room. I focused on that sound because it was something steady, something that didn't shift and twist like people do. A server carrying a tray of mini crab cakes paused to let me pass. I thanked him. He smiled at me with more kindness than I'd received from my own daughter-in-law that entire year. As I moved through the crowd, I caught glances, some curious, some dismissive, a few simply bored. Weddings bring out the best and worst in people. Everyone performs a version of themselves. Some performances are kinder than others. I found a quiet spot near the back, close to the tall windows overlooking the lawn. Outside, the ceremony chairs were lined up in perfect rows, the aisle sprinkled with white petals. I remembered helping my son tie his shoes when he was 5, when his fingers were too small to make a real knot. I remembered teaching him how to drive in the grocery store parking lot on Sunday mornings before the sun came up. I remembered the boy who used to run to me after school with stories he could barely get out fast enough. And now here I was, introduced as a burden. For a moment I wondered if I had imagined it, if the noise of the room had twisted her words into something crueler than she meant. But then I saw her looking at me from across the floor, not with guilt, not with regret, with satisfaction. The kind that comes from knowing you've drawn blood with just a few syllables. I straightened my shoulders. My late husband always said I carried myself like someone 2 inches taller than I really was. Grace is measured in posture, he'd tell me when he'd help zip my dress before a company dinner. Stand like you belong in every room you enter. So I stood like that now, spine steady, chin soft, eyes calm. But inside, something shifted. Not anger. Not yet. Something quieter. The beginning of understanding. The beginning of seeing people's true shapes. I folded my hands gently, letting the music wash over me. They could laugh. They could whisper. They could underestimate. I had learned, over many long years, that the quietest person in the room often holds the heaviest truth. And that truth has a way of walking to the surface, no matter how deep others try to bury it. I didn't know then that the twist would come within the hour. I didn't know that the man who laughed at her joke, her father, the one with the tailored suit and the gold cufflinks, would soon look at me with shock so loud it silenced the entire table. But we'll get there. For now, this is where the evening began. With a sting no one thought I'd feel, and a silence no one thought I'd use. The music shifted into something soft and familiar, an old love song people of my generation used to dance to, while I stayed near the tall windows, letting the glow from the chandeliers blur into warm halos. I kept my back straight, but inside, the words she said pressed against me like a bruise that hadn't decided what color to become yet. I wasn't angry. Not then. I was simply quiet. I watched guests settle into their seats, adjusting jackets, smoothing dresses, fixing tiny details that didn't matter yet, always seemed urgent at a wedding. A young woman near me tapped her heels nervously, probably worried about tripping when she walked down the aisle as a bridesmaid. A little boy in a bow tie tugged at his collar like it was choking him. Every detail was normal, ordinary, except the way people glanced at me. Quick, sideways looks, the kind people give when they've heard a comment they shouldn't repeat, but still want to see how the target reacts. I clasped my hands together, feeling the cool metal of my ring, my husband's ring, turned into a pendant I wore on a thin chain. He would have stood beside me today, tall and gentle, offering a small smile only I could read. He always had a way of grounding me without saying a word. I wished, just for a second, that I could hear him clear his throat like he used to before reminding me, "You don't owe anyone a performance." A server came by with glasses of sparkling cider. I took one, not because I wanted it, but because holding something made me look occupied. The bubbles tickled my nose as I lifted it slightly, pretending to toast to no one at all. The people at the main table laughed loudly again, laughter with sharp edges. I wondered if they realized how transparent they were. Most people don't know how clearly cruelty reflects in the eyes. I moved toward the seating chart display, looking for my name, even though I already suspected where it would be. Near the bottom? A corner. Somewhere behind a pillar where the photographer wouldn't accidentally capture me. I scanned the neat rows of calligraphy, each name perfectly looped. When I finally found mine, I didn't flinch. I just nodded once, as if confirming a math problem I already knew the answer to. My seat was at table 12, far from the head table, far from my son, close to the exit. Someone had planned it that way. I walked to the table slowly, one measured step after another. On the way, I passed the bride's parents. They didn't notice me at first, too busy discussing the wine selection with another couple. But when her father glanced my way, something flickered across his face. Not recognition. Not yet. Just a pause, like he was flipping through mental files and couldn't find the right one. Her mother offered a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. I returned a small nod. Nothing more. My silence wasn't submission. It was distance. Safety. At table 12, a woman in her 60s shifted her chair to make room for me. "Beautiful ceremony, isn't it?" she said. "Yes," I answered softly. "It is." She didn't push for more conversation. She didn't pry. I appreciated that. We sat together quietly as the officiant stepped forward to begin the ceremony. The string quartet eased into a gentle melody. Everyone rose. The bride appeared at the top of the aisle, glowing and graceful, glancing quickly at her parents, then scanning the crowd to make sure every pair of eyes was exactly where she wanted them. I stayed standing, hands folded, breathing evenly. But beneath the soft music and the ohs and ahs of the guests, a different feeling settled in my chest. Something steadier than hurt, heavier than disappointment. The kind of feeling a woman develops after decades of being underestimated. I watched her walk down the aisle in her white gown, her smile calculated, her chin lifted. She looked so sure of herself, as if she'd already won something. But she didn't know me. Not really. Not yet. And she certainly didn't know the weight of the truth I carried or how quickly a room can turn when people learn who you really are. So I stood quietly, letting the ceremony unfold like a slow tide, letting her enjoy her moment, because moments end, and hers would end sooner than she expected. The ceremony ended with applause that drifted upward like soft dust caught in the light. People filed out toward the reception hall, chatting about the vows, the flowers, the cake, every detail except the ones that truly mattered. I lingered near the aisle for a moment, letting the crowd move ahead. Sometimes it's easier to breathe when no one is watching you do it. As I walked toward the reception area, I caught a pair of whispers behind me. Not loud, not bold, just confident enough that they thought I wouldn't hear. "She doesn't look like she belongs here." "Well, you heard what the bride said earlier." I didn't turn. I didn't shrink. I kept moving, one quiet step after another. Their words weren't new. They were simply confirmation, threads tying together things I had sensed long before the wedding day. Inside the reception hall, the lights had been dimmed to a warm glow. The tables shimmered with gold accents, centerpieces stacked with cream roses and eucalyptus. I glanced toward the head table, where my son and his bride would sit. My son stood talking to one of his college friends, laughing easily, completely unaware of the undercurrent running beneath this perfect evening. I stepped aside to let a photographer pass. She was adjusting her lens when she stopped, pointed subtly toward the head table, and said to her assistant, "Make sure we get lots of shots of the bride's family. They're the highlight tonight." I swallowed once, slow and steady. Table 12 waited for me like a reminder. A quiet corner. A place to tuck away the parts of the family people didn't want on display. I sat down, smoothing my dress over my knees. The woman next to me, Angela, she'd introduced herself earlier, offered a gentle smile. "You holding up okay?" "I'm fine," I replied, "just taking it all in." She nodded, but her eyes lingered on me a second longer than simple politeness required. Maybe she'd heard something. Maybe she'd seen something. Some people read a room better than others. Dinner began with a salad topped with candied pecans. The bride's father stood for his opening toast, clearing his throat dramatically. His voice carried easily over the speakers, confident and practiced. He thanked guests, praised the couple, told a polished story about his daughter's childhood, how she always had excellent taste, how she knew how to upgrade her life. Several guests laughed knowingly. My fork paused above my plate. Upgrade. Interesting word choice. Then came the moment that stripped away any last illusion. A few minutes after the toast, I excused myself to stretch my legs. On my way toward the refreshment table, I passed the bride speaking with two bridesmaids. Her voice was low, but sharp enough to cut through the music. "She'll be fine at that table," she said. "It's better than having her up front. My parents don't want awkward photos." "How did your in-laws react?" one bridesmaid asked. She smiled, small, proud. "They know she's limited. I've told them enough." My feet stopped, but the rest of me stayed still. Inside, a slow understanding clicked into place. This wasn't a single comment at the introduction earlier. This was a pattern, a choice, a deliberate shaping of how others saw me. A story told about me instead of to me. I didn't approach her. I didn't interrupt. I let her have her whispered moment of superiority. Because I'd already begun collecting the pieces, every glance, every comment, every careful exclusion. And once you start seeing the truth clearly, you stop being hurt by it and start memorizing it. She turned slightly and spotted me near the dessert table. Her expression barely shifted, but the satisfaction in her eyes dimmed for half a second. She wasn't expecting me to overhear. She wasn't expecting me to stand so steady. I offered a small nod, not a smile, not a challenge, just acknowledgement. And "I see you" without saying a word. Then I walked back to table 12, the soft hum of conversation fading behind me, and settled into my seat again. This time I didn't fold my hands. I laid them flat on the table. Grounded. Certain. Because now I knew the truth. She hadn't slipped up earlier. She hadn't made a careless joke. She had meant every word. And people who mean their cruelty always reveal more than they intend to. When I returned to table 12, the room felt different. Not because anything had changed on the surface, but because I had. There's a moment, a very quiet one, when a person stops wondering why they're being treated a certain way and starts remembering every sign they ignored on the road that led there. That moment settled over me like a thin veil. The music grew livelier as dinner plates were cleared. Guests leaned in closer to talk over the beat, their voices mixing with the clinking of glasses. But my mind wasn't on the present chatter. It drifted, unspooled, pulling threads from years earlier. Threads I'd tucked away because that's what you do for family. I remembered the first time my daughter-in-law visited our home. She'd walked through each room like a realtor evaluating square footage. She complimented the hardwood floors, but commented that the decor felt a little dated. I had laughed softly and said, "Well, it's been the same since my husband and I bought the place." She smiled politely, but her eyes wandered to the framed photos on the mantel. Weddings, graduations, little league games. And I could almost hear her thinking which ones she'd replace someday. I remembered birthdays where she'd give me scented candles that smelled nothing like the ones I used, and sweaters 2 sizes too small. Gifts chosen not with care, but obligation. I'd thank her, and she'd snap a quick photo to post online with a caption about quality time with family, even though she'd spent most of the evening scrolling through her phone. I remembered a Thanksgiving when she'd insisted on hosting, telling my son it was time for a more modern holiday. I had brought my pumpkin pie, my husband's favorite recipe, and she'd placed it on the far end of the dessert table, behind store-bought pastries. By the time dinner ended, not a single slice had been touched. She saw me notice. She didn't apologize. She just shrugged. I remembered the time she convinced my son that I didn't need to help with anything anymore. House repairs, errands, doctor appointments. She should rest, she'd said sweetly, as if I were a burden wrapped in kindness. But rest wasn't what she meant. She wanted distance. She wanted space between my son and me, carved out subtly, politely, in ways only a mother's heart can detect. And I remembered, too, the silence after my husband passed. The way she stopped calling unless she needed something signed. The way she told my son not to pressure me with too many invitations, as if grief were contagious. Table 12 blurred for a moment as those memories stacked on top of each other, forming a picture I hadn't wanted to see clearly until now. Angela, the woman beside me, gently nudged my elbow. "You okay?" "I'm fine," I said again. But this time, the words felt different. Not a shield, just a fact. I wasn't fragile. I was simply finally seeing the truth without the soft filters I had always placed over it. The DJ announced that speeches from family would begin soon. Guests clapped. The bride adjusted her veil. My son smiled brightly, unaware of the shadow beneath all the glitter. As I watched them settle into their seats, I wondered if he remembered all the nights I stayed up sewing his Halloween costumes, or the mornings I packed his lunch with the little notes he used to hide in his pocket. I wondered if he knew how many times I'd defended his wife privately, giving her the benefit of the doubt because I believed love could soften sharp corners. But sharp corners stay sharp. They don't round themselves for anyone. A server refilled my water glass. The coolness of the condensation felt grounding against my fingertips. I let my breath out slowly. The truth was simple. This wedding wasn't the beginning of the disrespect. It was just the first time it was said aloud, in front of witnesses. And now that the words had left her mouth, now that they'd echoed long enough to settle into the bones of the evening, something in me refused to go back to the comfortable blur of pretending. I sat a little straighter. Not in defiance. In clarity. Because once a person shows you exactly who they are, you stop squinting to see something better. The DJ tapped the microphone, asking everyone to take their seats for the family speeches. Conversations quieted. Chairs scraped softly against the floor. The bride's side of the room leaned forward with the kind of eager attention people reserve for stories they expect to flatter them. Table 12, my small corner, stayed still. My son's best friend stood first. He told a harmless story about their college days. Late-night pizza, bad haircuts, road trips in a rusty sedan. People laughed. I smiled too, because those memories belonged to a version of my son I knew well. A version before life became polished and curated, before he married someone who measured worth by the shine on a surface. When the toast ended, the bride gave a bright signal to her mother. Her mother rose gracefully, smoothing her dress as if preparing for a spotlight she'd always expected. She began with praise. Her daughter's ambition, elegance, impeccable taste. Every sentence landed like a pinprick, subtle but sharp, each one carefully crafted to show their family's superiority without saying it aloud. Then she mentioned the importance of surrounding yourself with people who elevate you. The people near her nodded politely. I lowered my gaze to my water glass. Next came the groom's turn, and my son stood. He looked a little nervous, rubbing his thumb along the edge of his note card. He began with gratitude, thanking everyone for coming, thanking his bride, thanking her family for hosting such a beautiful celebration. He didn't mention me. Not once. Not even in the way children sometimes do without meaning to. No slip of, "my mom always taught me," or "I learned that from her." It wasn't intentional. I knew that. He was swept up, overwhelmed, wanting to get everything right. But still, the omission sat heavy. After he finished, the room clapped warmly. The bride squeezed his hand, beaming. Then, unexpectedly, Angela beside me leaned slightly closer and whispered, "Would you like me to say something to him later?" I shook my head gently. No need. I didn't need rescuing. I didn't need anyone to speak for me. I had lived long enough to know the difference between hurt and humiliation, and long enough to know which one I had the power to control. As the next speech began, a cousin from the bride's side sharing a rehearsed anecdote, I let my attention drift. I scanned the room, watching the subtle shifts in people's expressions. The way some guests perked up when the bride spoke, the way they dimmed when someone less impressive stepped forward. Hierarchies were forming right in front of me, invisible lines drawn through eye contact and seating arrangements. Near the bar, I noticed the bride's father again. He stood with a group of men in tailored suits, holding a glass of something amber. He was laughing, but not fully engaged. His eyes kept drifting toward me, narrowing slightly as if he were trying to place my face. I didn't avert my gaze. I met it for a second, steady and calm, then looked away. A small ripple of curiosity stirred across their group. Men like him are used to recognizing important people instantly. When they can't, it pokes at them like an itch they can't reach. Back at my table, dessert arrived. A small slice of lemon cake with a sprig of mint. I lifted my fork, pausing before taking a bite. The frosting reminded me of cakes my husband used to bring home from a bakery 10 miles out of town. The one he said made the best custard in the county. We used to split a slice after dinner, each taking 2 small bites at a time so it would last longer. Thinking of him anchored me. It reminded me that I came from a life built on steadiness, not status. As the lights dimmed for the couple's first dance, whispers floated again from the nearby tables. Not about me this time. Just idle comments, surface-level judgments, the kind people make when they think their lives are center stage. But underneath it all, I could feel the shift, the small but undeniable awareness that I wasn't reacting the way they'd expected. They had offered humiliation. I had given them silence, and silence unsettles people far more than tears. The bride walked past my table right then, her gown sweeping the floor like a moving cloud. She didn't look at me directly, but I saw the faint tension in her jaw, the kind that appears when someone realizes their target isn't crumbling the way they imagined. I sat very still. Not defeated. Not invisible. Just present. Steadier than she expected, anchored in a truth she didn't yet understand. A truth that would soon find its way to the surface. The lights dimmed further as the couple moved into their first dance, a slow melody floating across the room like a memory trying to settle. Guests gathered near the dance floor with their phones held high, ready to capture perfection. I stayed seated at table 12, hands resting calmly on the linen, watching without inserting myself into the scene. From where I sat, I could see the bride lean closer to my son, whispering something with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She glanced my way once, just once, checking whether I was watching. I didn't avert my gaze. I didn't give her the satisfaction of looking away. I simply met her eyes with a steady expression and then looked past her, as if her presence held no particular weight. Her smile faltered, only by a fraction, but enough. The dance ended, and the DJ invited guests to join in. Couples moved to the floor, laughing, swaying, trying to fit themselves into the glow of the moment. I stayed where I was. My body was still, but inside, something quiet had begun to shift. Not anger, not bitterness, something firmer, something that made my spine lengthen ever so slightly. Angela tapped my arm gently. "Would you like to dance?" "Thank you," I said, "but I'll sit this one out." She nodded and went to join her husband, leaving me alone at the table again. I didn't mind. Solitude has never scared me. It tells the truth more honestly than company does. As I watched the room move, my daughter-in-law's laughter rose above the music. Sharp, bright, almost triumphant. She was surrounded by friends, one hand in the air, mimicking some detail about the seating chart as they chuckled along. She didn't say my name, but I didn't need to hear words to understand their direction. Then came the first sign of unease from her. I saw it clearly. My son excused himself to speak with the coordinator, and she turned her gaze toward me again. This time, her expression wasn't triumphant. It was curious, maybe even bothered. She expected me to crumble, to wilt, to retreat to the restroom and hide behind a closed stall door. That's what people like her rely on. Reaction. But all she got was quiet resilience. And quiet resilience unnerves the arrogant. I took a sip of water, slow and deliberate. The condensation on the glass slid across my fingers, a soft reminder of the calm I was choosing. A few minutes later, she approached the table, alone. Her heels clicked against the hardwood floor in a rhythm too sharp for the music. She stopped beside me, resting her manicured hand on the back of the empty chair next to mine. "Is everything okay back here?" she asked, tone sweetened, but insincere. "Yes," I said. "Thank you." She waited for more. For emotion. For apology. For anything that would put her back in control of the moment. I gave her nothing. Her smile tightened. "I just wanted to make sure you didn't feel overlooked." "I don't," I replied softly. Her lips parted slightly, surprised by the calmness. She wasn't ready for steadiness. She was prepared for fragility. And when she didn't find it, something uncertain flickered behind her eyes. She straightened her posture, flustered not by what I'd said, but by what I hadn't. "Well," she said finally, "I'm glad you're comfortable." She left quickly after that, returning to her circle of friends with a brightness that felt forced, like a light bulb flickering at the edge of its life. Her laughter resumed, louder than before, an overcompensation. And I sat there, still and quiet, letting her discomfort settle, letting her uncertainty root itself. Because sometimes the first step to reclaiming your place isn't confrontation, it's refusal. Refusal to shrink. Refusal to break. Refusal to let someone else write your story while you're still standing in the room. As the music shifted again, I folded my napkin neatly and placed it by my plate. Small movements, small decisions. But each one carried weight. She had meant to diminish me that day, but instead she revealed herself. And I wasn't done watching. When the music shifted into a livelier tempo, the energy in the room rose with it. Guests crowded the dance floor again, leaving the tables mostly empty. I remained seated, watching the swirl of fabric and laughter move like a tide I had no intention of stepping into. My stillness made me invisible to those who only look for spectacle, but very visible to those who look for weakness. And that was when her tone changed. Not publicly, not dramatically, just in small, telling ways. From across the room, my daughter-in-law threw quick glances toward table 12. They weren't the satisfied glances from earlier. These were sharper, narrower, like she was trying to read something she hadn't expected to appear. People who rely on control do not like loose ends, and in her mind, I was supposed to be one. Instead, I had become a question mark. Her mother approached her at one point, whispering something with a pointed expression. I saw her daughter shake her head, jaw tightening. Whatever had been said, she didn't like it. She downed the rest of her champagne faster than someone trying to maintain composure should. Meanwhile, her father wandered near the bar again, speaking with a businessman whose voice carried. I heard snippets. Stock options, new acquisitions, an upcoming board vote. Words I knew well. Words that belonged to the world my husband built long before these people ever learned how to posture. One of the men nodded toward me. The bride's father followed the gesture, eyes lingering a beat longer than before. Not rude, not friendly, just calculating. Like a man trying to remember where he'd seen a particular painting, knowing it mattered, but not yet understanding why. At table 12, Angela returned with 2 glasses of sparkling cider. She set one in front of me. "You look like someone who could use a refill," she said softly. "Thank you," I replied. She sat down, studying my face with a quiet understanding that required no explanation. "You've handled yourself with a lot of grace tonight," she said. I didn't respond, not because her words weren't kind, but because acknowledging them felt like turning a key too soon. The DJ announced the next round of family photos. The bride and groom moved toward the backdrop decorated with their initials. Bridesmaids rushed to adjust dresses. Groomsmen straightened ties. The photographer called out instructions. A coordinator approached our table. "Family of the groom?" she asked. I stood. "Yes." She smiled politely and guided me toward the group. But when my daughter-in-law saw me approaching, her expression shifted. Just a flicker, but unmistakable. She leaned in to whisper something to the photographer, and he hesitated. "Actually," he said awkwardly, "we'll start with the couple and the bride's side first." Her side. Always her side. Always first. I stepped back without comment. The coordinator looked apologetic, but I nodded reassuringly to ease her discomfort. I wasn't going to argue for a place in a photograph that would never tell the truth anyway. Instead, I observed. Her relatives clustered tightly, standing with the confident posture of people who believe they are the centerpiece of every room. My son stood beside her, smiling for the camera, unaware of the subtle rearrangements shaping the moment. The photographer snapped image after image. The bride checked the previews each time, approving or dismissing with a tilt of her chin. I watched her father, though. He watched me. Longer this time. More intently. Something in his expression cracked. Just a hairline fracture of recognition. He rubbed his jaw thoughtfully, the kind of gesture men make when they've stumbled on a piece of information they didn't realize they already had. My daughter-in-law followed his gaze and turned to look at me. This time, when our eyes met, I held her stare not with challenge, but with the steady, wordless certainty that comes from seeing someone's intentions laid bare. She blinked first. And it was then, not earlier, not during the ceremony, not during the speeches, that I knew the balance was shifting. Not loudly. Not publicly. Just enough for the air in the room to feel different. Enough for her to sense, maybe for the first time in her life, that she had pushed too far. The photographer shifted his lights, preparing for the next round of shots, and guests drifted toward the dessert table or back to the bar. The energy dipped for a moment, just enough for the truth under the surface to breathe. I stayed a few steps behind the crowd, not hiding, just watching. Sometimes the clearest view is from the quietest corner. Her father kept glancing in my direction, that thin line of curiosity etched deeper across his forehead. I'd seen that look before. In boardrooms, at investment dinners, in conversations where people weren't sure whether to introduce themselves or wait to be introduced. It wasn't interest. It wasn't recognition. It was calculation. He murmured something to the man beside him, and both of them turned their eyes toward me again. There was no malice in it, just intent. Intent has a weight, even across a room. Meanwhile, my daughter-in-law hovered near the photographer, trying to orchestrate the moment. She placed her hand on my son's arm, positioning him slightly toward her family's center. It was subtle, practiced, like someone arranging flowers so the prettier ones stood forward. But her eyes kept cutting back to me. Not triumphant anymore. Not certain. Just unsettled. I walked toward the refreshment table, mostly to avoid the traffic near the dance floor. A server offered me a glass of water with lemon. I accepted it, wrapping my fingers around the cold stem of the glass. Across the table, a couple in their 70s chatted about the valet line, about how long it would take to get on the highway afterward. Ordinary things. Normal things. A quiet soundscape to steady the mind. Then, as I turned to step away, someone approached from my left, one of the bride's uncles, I believed. He gave me a polite smile that seemed genuine enough. "You're the groom's mother, right?" he asked. "Yes," I said. He nodded slowly, eyes scanning me with a careful, almost respectful curiosity. "I've heard your family has some interesting history in business." "History tends to accumulate when you've lived long enough," I replied. He chuckled softly. "I suppose so." But the way he lingered, the slight tilt of his head, he wasn't just making friendly conversation. Someone had said something. Or he had noticed something. Or perhaps her father's uncertainty had stirred something among those who paid attention to power more than gossip. I didn't give him more. I didn't elaborate. I let the quiet speak for me. Silence, when held properly, is not emptiness. It's a boundary. He excused himself a moment later, and I moved toward the edge of the room, where a row of tall windows framed the night. The lawn outside was dotted with lanterns, and a cool breeze fogged the glass slightly. I traced a small invisible curve with my fingertip, an old habit from childhood, a grounding one, then folded my hands in front of me. From behind, footsteps approached. Slow, heavy, intentional. Her father. He stopped a short distance away, as if testing the air before speaking. For the first time that evening, his voice held no performance. "Have we met before?" he asked. I turned slightly, enough to be polite, but not inviting. "I don't believe so." He studied my face, and the flicker of recognition returned, stronger this time, tugging at something he couldn't ignore. "You look familiar," he murmured. "I'm trying to place it." "I hear that often," I said gently. It wasn't a lie. Not in rooms like this. Before he could speak again, his wife called his name sharply from across the hall, breaking the moment. He hesitated, then gave a short nod and walked back to her. My daughter-in-law had been watching from a distance. Her expression tightened when she saw her father walk away looking unsettled. She whispered urgently to her mother, who leaned closer, frowning. A ripple of tension passed through their little circle, small but unmistakable. And I felt it then, in the shift of their shoulders, in the way their conversations stuttered for half a second, in the glance they exchanged that carried more fear than arrogance. They didn't know why I mattered. Not yet. But they sensed it. And sensing it was enough to crack their certainty. The reception shifted again when the coordinator announced the next sequence of photos, this time including the groom's family. Conversations quieted. People straightened jackets and fixed lipstick. The air carried that subtle tension that forms when different sides of a family are expected to stand shoulder to shoulder, smiling as though everything beneath the surface is smooth. I walked toward the designated spot without hurry. My steps were steady, unbothered by the stares or the small murmurs floating in my wake. The photographer gestured for everyone to group together. My son motioned for me to stand beside him, and for a brief moment, his smile softened into something familiar, something that belonged to the boy who once held my hand while crossing busy streets. But before I could move closer, my daughter-in-law intervened. Quickly, quietly, deliberately. "Let's keep her on the end," she told the photographer, placing her hand firmly on his arm. "It's more balanced for the shot." Balanced. Such an elegant word for what she really meant. I didn't react. I simply moved to the end of the row as instructed. My son opened his mouth, maybe to object, maybe to ask a question, but she squeezed his hand and he fell silent. I didn't blame him. Not in that moment. Weddings have a way of making people choose ease over truth. The flash went off. Once, twice, 3 times. Each burst of light froze the strained arrangement. Her centered, her parents framing her, my son tucked neatly into their structure, and me positioned like a decorative afterthought. But they weren't watching the photographer. They were watching me. All of them. Because I wasn't doing what they expected. I wasn't shrinking. I wasn't frowning. I wasn't shifting awkwardly or looking uncomfortable. I simply stood with a calmness that didn't match the corner they tried to push me into. When the photographer lowered the camera, her father stepped forward slightly, looking at me with that same searching expression. "I swear I know you from somewhere," he said under his breath. It wasn't a question anymore. It was a certainty trying to surface. My daughter-in-law's head snapped toward him. "Dad, can we just finish the photos?" But he didn't answer her. His eyes stayed on me, narrowing the way a man does when he finally spots what's been sitting right in front of him. The coordinator called the next group, and everyone began to disperse. Yet he stayed rooted, thoughtful, his gaze following me as I stepped away. His hesitation spread through the bride's side of the family like a slow, silent breeze. You could feel the shift, not loud, not chaotic, just a gradual unraveling of their confidence. At my table again, Angela leaned in a little. "Something's going on," she whispered. "I didn't confirm or deny it. I didn't have to." The signs were everywhere. Across the room, I watched my daughter-in-law whisper urgently to her mother, who stiffened immediately. Her eyes drifted toward her husband with suspicion, maybe even fear, as if she sensed that he knew something she didn't. Their small, controlled empire, the one built on appearances and curated impressions, had sprung its first visible crack. Then the bride glanced at me, truly looked at me, not with annoyance, not with superiority, but with uncertainty tinged with alarm, like someone watching a storm cloud form where the sky was supposed to be clear. She mouthed something to her husband. He frowned. Her father kept staring at me. Other guests began whispering, and the calm I held inside me settled deeper like a stone dropped gently into still water. Because they had spent the entire evening trying to shrink me. But now, without knowing how or why, they were the ones pulling back. And the moment of truth, the one none of them were prepared for, was already on its way. The DJ called everyone back to the tables for the official family toast, the one meant to close the evening with grace and unity. Glasses clinked. Conversations softened. The air pulled tight, as if the room itself sensed something was about to shift. Her father stood slowly, lifting his champagne flute, but his eyes weren't on the crowd. They were on me. Still searching, still digging through memory he couldn't place. The bride reached for his sleeve. "Dad, just do the toast," she whispered sharply. He didn't respond. Instead, he cleared his throat. gaze fixed in my direction, even as he raised his glass toward the couple. He spoke the expected lines: love, commitment, family, future. But there was a tremor under the words, the tremor of a man whose mind was somewhere else entirely. I didn't look away, not to challenge him, but because I could feel the moment arriving, quiet, certain, inevitable. Then, as the toast reached its final line, he paused, a long pause, one that didn't belong to scripted speeches or sentimental fathers. He lowered his glass, took one slow step forward, and said very carefully, "I need to ask something." The music stopped abruptly. Guests turned. Even the servers froze mid-pour. The bride's expression tightened so fast it looked painful. Her father's eyes stayed locked on me. "Ma'am," he said, voice steady but tense. "Are you—" He hesitated, breath catching in his throat. "Are you the woman who bought out Harbor West Holdings 5 years ago?" A murmur rippled through the room. Not loud, but unmistakably sharp. The bride's hand flew to her father's arm. "Dad, what are you talking about?" But he ignored her, stepping forward another inch, studying me like a man who had just realized he was standing in the presence of someone he should have recognized immediately. I remained still. I didn't nod. I didn't confirm. I simply held his gaze, quiet, calm, unbothered, as the truth formed on its own. His face drained of color. "It is you," he whispered. "You're the one who outbid our board. You're the reason we had to restructure. You're—" He couldn't finish. He didn't need to. The rest of the room understood exactly enough. The bride stared at me, confusion twisting into fear. "What is he talking about?" she demanded. Her father finally turned to her, voice thin. "Your mother and I lost our controlling share because of her. She was the private buyer, the one no one could identify." Gasps. Whispers. Stunned silence, broken only by the faint clink of someone setting down a glass too hard. The bride took a step back, shaking her head. "That doesn't make sense. She can't be." But she couldn't finish either, because the room was already rearranging itself in real time. The same people who had laughed earlier, the same people who had looked at me like I didn't belong, now stared with a mixture of shock, curiosity, and dawning regret. My son looked at me, eyes wide, confusion mixing with something softer, something like recognition of a truth he had never asked about. And my daughter-in-law. Her face drained, her shoulders stiffened, and her breath caught in her throat as if the floor beneath her had shifted an inch. She had introduced me as the family shame. She had curated an image built on mockery. She had humiliated me in front of the very people whose lives I had directly influenced without them ever knowing. And now, without raising my voice, without moving from my chair, without uttering a single sentence, the room had turned. I gently set my glass down. No theatrics. No speeches. Just a simple act that felt like closing a book others had tried to write for me. Her father swallowed hard, still staring. The bride whispered, "Dad, what do we do?" But there was nothing left for them to do. The truth had already landed. Quietly, cleanly, completely. The room didn't crumble after his question. It didn't erupt. It didn't descend into chaos. It did something quieter. It shifted. A subtle tilt, like the moment a painting on the wall slides a single inch, and suddenly everyone realizes it had been crooked all along. Conversations broke apart mid-sentence. Eyes that had avoided me all evening now snapped toward me with new calculation. People who once looked through me now looked at me, as if I'd been rewritten in real time. I didn't move, didn't adjust my expression, didn't offer a single word. Silence at my age is a kind of authority. My daughter-in-law's breath came unevenly, her voice low and thin. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" she whispered, though it wasn't really a question. It was panic disguised as curiosity. I didn't answer. I had nothing to prove. Her mother leaned in toward her husband, whispering sharply. Her father stared straight ahead, processing a truth he'd once dismissed as impossible. He wasn't angry, not yet. He was stunned in the way powerful men are stunned when they realize the world contains people they never thought to look up at. My son stepped toward me, slowly, like someone approaching the edge of a truth he wasn't sure he was ready to face. "Mom, why didn't you tell me?" I looked at him gently. "You never asked." And that was the truth. He never did. Not out of neglect, out of assumption. He had always believed I lived a quiet, simple life. And I had let him believe that because it allowed him to build his own without trying to live in my shadow. The coordinator, sensing tension she couldn't place, quickly redirected the guests toward dessert. The DJ restarted the music with a bright, nervous energy. People pretended to resume the night, but their eyes kept drifting back to me, the way people return to a headline they don't fully understand. I returned to table 12, the same seat they had pushed me to, the seat meant to sideline me, tuck me away, reduce me. And yet it had become the center of the room's attention, the place everyone now watched. Angela sat beside me again, giving me a small smile filled with something that looked a lot like pride. "You handled that beautifully," she murmured. "I didn't handle anything?" I said softly. "Truth took care of itself." She nodded, understanding in her eyes. Across the room, my daughter-in-law paced in small, tight circles, whispering frantically to her mother. They kept glancing my way, as if expecting me to approach them, to clarify, to soften the blow her father had unintentionally delivered. But I didn't move, because sometimes the most powerful response is no response at all. My son approached again, slower this time. He sat in the empty chair beside me, exhaling hard. "Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't know." "It's all right," I said, placing a hand over his. "You were never meant to know everything at once." He looked down, ashamed, not of me, but of the way his wife had acted, of the way he had missed it, of the way he had let the evening unfold without realizing the depth of its cruelty. "I should have asked where you wanted to sit," he said quietly. "You didn't," I replied, "because you trusted someone else to decide for you." His shoulders tensed. The truth can hurt gently, too. Across the hall, the bride watched him speak to me. I saw the fear in her eyes, a fear no one else noticed, the fear of losing control, the fear of losing the narrative she built. She took 2 steps toward us, then stopped when my son didn't look up. At table 12, though, I felt something shift in myself, too. Not triumph, not vindication, just release. A loosening of a weight I didn't realize I'd been carrying for years. I wasn't the shame she named me. I wasn't the fragile shadow she expected me to be. I was exactly who I had always been, and now the room finally saw it. When the reception finally began to wind down, the room exhaled in a long, uneven breath. People drifted toward the exits, clutching coats and gift bags, speaking in low voices colored with the shock of what they'd learned. No one laughed the way they had earlier. No one whispered loudly. The brightness of the night had dimmed into something more honest, something that no longer relied on pretending. I rose from table 12 and smoothed the fabric of my dress, not out of self-consciousness, but out of habit. Years of carrying myself with quiet dignity don't disappear because someone tried to shrink me for a few hours. Angela squeezed my hand before gathering her things. "You deserve better than this room," she said gently. "I always did," I answered. My son walked with me toward the exit, his steps slower, heavier, as if replaying the entire evening in his head. The weight of realization sat on his shoulders, not crushing him, but reshaping him. "Mom, I'm going to fix this," he whispered. "That's not your job tonight," I told him. "Just learn from it." He nodded, eyes shining with a mix of regret and resolve. Near the entrance, my daughter-in-law stood alone, wringing her hands. The confidence she wore earlier had peeled away, leaving something raw and unsteady. When she saw me, she inhaled sharply, as if bracing for impact. I didn't stop, didn't confront, didn't deliver a speech she could twist into a villain's monologue later. I simply paused beside her, long enough for her to hear the soft truth in my voice. Cruelty always circles back to the one who casts it. Her eyes widened. Whether from fear or understanding, I didn't know. But the words settled between us like a stone dropped into still water. Outside, the night air brushed against my skin. Cool, steady, real. The lanterns along the walkway flickered in the breeze, and my son offered me his arm. I didn't take it, not out of pride, but because I wanted him to walk beside me, not ahead of me or behind me. We reached the end of the path, and I stopped to look back at the ballroom glowing behind its tall windows. It wasn't a place of humiliation anymore. It wasn't a battlefield. It was just a room where truth had finally found its way to the surface. And I didn't need applause. I didn't need recognition. I didn't need anyone to rewrite the evening in my favor, because the moment I stepped into the cool night air, I felt something lift. A weight I had carried through years of overlooked kindness, quiet sacrifices, and silent endurance. I was free. Not because they finally saw me clearly, but because I no longer cared who refused to. Later that week, I spent the morning with my granddaughter, my son's daughter from his first marriage. We baked cookies in my kitchen, laughing when flour dusted her hair like snow. She didn't know anything about the wedding drama. She just held my hand with the simple purity only children possess and said, "Grandma, you smell like vanilla today." And in that small, ordinary moment, I realized something. Love isn't loud. It isn't perfect. It doesn't need a ballroom or applause. Love shows up in the people who choose you without hesitation, the ones who see you clearly without needing your resume, the ones who don't measure you by the size of your seat at their table. As I tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, I thought of all the noise from the wedding night, the laughter, the whispers, the shock, the shifting glances, and how none of it mattered anymore. The people who mattered were already here, and the life I had built, quietly and fully, didn't need validation from anyone who tried to belittle it. In the end, family is not determined by blood or ceremony. Family is shaped by respect, by kindness, by truth, and standing there with my granddaughter's small hand in mine, I knew the story had closed exactly where it needed to. Not with revenge, not with triumph, but with clarity. The kind that settles gently, like dusk on a quiet street, ending the day not with noise, but with peace.